John Lee Anderson é jornalista, mas quem lê seus livros sabe que ele é mais do que isso. Na verdade, é um cronista de crises sociais e políticas. Ficou conhecido mundialmente quando escreveu uma elogiada biografia de Che Guevara, lançada em 97. Para escrever o livro, mudou-se com a família para Cuba e teve acesso a documentos inéditos. O resultado é um retrato acurado de um revolucionário que se tornou um ícone. A biografia, equilibrada, mostra as contradições de um líder que foi ao mesmo tempo um revolucionário inspirador e um político dogmático que perseguiu e até mandou executar inimigos. O livro foi uma das fontes do roteiro do filme Che, épico em 2 partes, dirigido por Steven Soderbergh, com Benício Del Toro no papel principal.
Aqui está a página rota.
Anderson fez várias coberturas de guerras. Para escrever seu primeiro livro sobre guerrilhas, em 92, esteve em El Salvador, no Afeganistão, em Mianmar, no Saara Ocidental e na faixa de Gaza. Em 2001, Anderson chegou ao Afeganistão 10 dias antes de os Estados Unidos começarem a bombardear o país. Em 2003, durante a ocupação do Iraque, resistiu aos apelos de seus editores para sair da zona de perigo. Ficou em Bagdá e relatou o fim do regime de Saddam Hussein através de histórias de gente comum. Dessa vivência saiu o livro A Queda de Bagdá. Americano, filho de diplomata, Anderson morou na Coreia do Sul, no Peru, na Colômbia, em Taiwan, na Indonésia e na Libéria. Hoje mora na Inglaterra com a mulher e 3 filhos. O Milênio aproveitou a presença de John Lee Anderson em São Paulo para gravar este programa especial em 2 partes. What will be the consequences of Osama bin Laden's death? What will change in the United States agenda in Middle East and North of Africa? And what about the Islamic fundamentalist groups' agenda around the world?
Osama bin Laden's death occurs at an extraordinary moment of change. After 10 years of steady confrontation between the West and what we could call the phenomena of extreme Islam, which seemed to be the only new phenomena coming out of the Muslim and the Arab world, was this irredentist, extremist, jihadist militancy. And much of the security policy of the West, in particular the United States, really had begun to be predicated around that threat. And then out of the blue, beginning just before the end of last year and early this year, came what we're now calling the Arab Spring, which really is something, a phenomena on the margin of Al-Qaeda. You know, it's ironic, there's a bittersweet irony to the fact that Osama bin Laden died at a moment in which the Arab world that he was hoping to revolutionize through extremism was changing itself through democratic protest, countered, yes, by violence, and in some cases spilling over into violence, like in Libya, by the protesters because they have no choice. But nonetheless, a phenomena really that has nothing to do with Al-Qaeda and everything to do with ordinary people expressing ordinary hopes and aspirations for democratic change, revolutionizing their own environments through two key things: the advent of social networking tools and the internet, mobile internet, allowing people to organize and to rapidly send information to one another, which has become an empowering tool. We saw it first in Iran about 2 years ago, where it was crushed, and then we've seen it in the Arab world nearby. And the other crucial ingredient is the loss of fear. People who were conditioned for years to living under dictatorship and not questioning have lost their fear. And it's a generational thing. In a way, it's analogous to what happened in the 1960s in the West, in the primarily the democratic free market West, the United States and Western Europe, with the revolt of the youth against the established order. And that took on, at the time, sort of left-wing manifestations. This Arab Spring is somehow analogous to that, because it's a part of the world that has a lot in common. And although it doesn't have a political tendency, it is particularly left or right. It is about freedom. And the generation of the youth's parents, that is people in their late 40s, 50s, and 60s, by and large, had allowed themselves to become conditioned to this life under dictatorship. When they were young, they were terrorized by their dictators, and they stopped fighting. If they fought, they stopped. But their children, who are 18, 19, 20, 22, have seen that, you know, groups openly together, some will sacrifice, but if they can all gather together, they can actually oust their dictators. So they saw it in Tunisia, and they saw it in Egypt.
Were the popular revolts, the so-called Arab Spring, a surprise to you?
Yes and no. That is to say, I couldn't have predicted it. Just as I could not have predicted the Green Revolution in Iran. I had been in Iran only 6 or 8 months before, and my impression of the young Iranians at the time was that they were self-indulgent, living fantasy lives, with all of their political potential taken away from them. And then suddenly, they flowered. And of course, the regime used the same tools that they had used to gather against them. In other words, if Twitter is useful for you to tell people to organize in a way, to lots of people go to a certain plaza to organize, to protest, the regime also uses these now social networking tools to terrorize people. What I mean to say is that we now are dealing with a situation that's becoming more sophisticated, more complex. I could never have predicted the Arab Spring, but the minute it happened, it was somehow like it was for them, also for people who knew these societies, like a veil falling. Of course, you know, all that was ever standing between them and change was their fear, and they've lost their fear. And when people lose their fear, they're capable of anything.
How could be the way out for the stalemate in Libya?
Really, the only way out is if Gaddafi accepts exile. And, you know, it's not in his nature to. Maybe if they kill more of his children, he will. This is the kind of war it is now. It's very brutal. It's about, you know, he conceives of himself as a revolutionary. He's very Libyan. He can't imagine himself anywhere else. He sees himself as an historic personality. He's thinking now about his legacy, too. Where is he going to go? He's made terror in so many countries around that nobody will take him in the Arab world. He could maybe go to Burkina Faso. One of these African petty dictators whom he's helped. But nowadays, I mean, he would be silly to do that because he would know that they would come and get him. Charles Taylor agreed to go to Nigeria, and, you know, he was sold out. He's sitting in The Hague now. There's nowhere to go for Gaddafi. And I think this is somehow possibly a mistake, because now with his back against the wall, he can only fight back, and it can only get more ugly, which is why we're seeing missile strikes aimed clearly at assassinating him. NATO by NATO. They say it's to get his command and control facilities. Everybody knows they're trying to assassinate him. So, however this came about, and it's not at all pretty, and it's distasteful to watch. This sort of war, remote control war, it's not a noble war. It's not a noble war by the West, and it's certainly not a noble war by Gaddafi. It's a very ugly situation, because he was allowed to stay in power through oil deals with the West. There was a lot of corruption, a lot of people in the West, in some of the same countries that are now attacking him, made a lot of money from Gaddafi.
Like Turkey.
Turkey has $25 billion in construction projects alone in Libya. China, who knows how many. But also Italy, France, US, Britain. It's an ugly story, And so we should all feel uncomfortable while it's going on. But what is also true is that Gaddafi's people, that by and large, finally looked at him and said, "What are you doing here? Who put you here? Why are you ruling us? How dare you? How dare you tell us what to do?" And that's never happened before in the Arab world.
And what can the international community do to promote democracy in Middle East and North Africa? And when external military intervention required?
This is, a very good question. And it's, I think, what President Obama and the others are grappling with right now. This is the key. As I was saying before, I think